Good morning all. I don't have much of an update on Clonmel, but I'm going to get there tomorrow now and have a look around and get some up-to-date footage and stuff. I've seen a photo which is taken from high enough of the land, and the boundaries have been extended again. Like, this is an unbelievably huge site. Okay, I don't know how many acres, but you're looking at least 15-20 acres that's closed off, I would imagine. If any farmer or landowner wants to have a go at the acreage, off you go. But it's just an estimate. I'll throw up a photo as well, and just to show, but the boundaries have been extended again, and the place is massive. The ground has been rocked out and flattened. It looks predominantly flattened anyway. So it looks like it's ready to go. Word is that there's no point even saying the word, because they could fly these modular homes in at any given moment. Okay, and as I said before, more than likely the people that are going to be going into those modular homes are already based around the town, okay, in private holdings and all that kind of stuff. Okay, but there was two things aside from that. There was two things that I wanted to talk about today, and one is just bouncing off news stories, right? So the first is John Lambert came out and said he's a professor in UCD and he specialises, I believe, in long COVID, HIV treatment, hepatitis C treatment and stuff like that. Okay, so he's in the business of COVID stuff, studying it. Great, off you go. Now he's come out and said that people should start wearing face masks again in hospitals due to a surge in COVID. Okay, so when you take this in isolation, you go, grand, nice warning by what looks like a specialist in the field and all that. But then you start looking around at the context in which this is coming up in. So you can see in Australia as well, they're driving home the idea of bird flu, whether it's there at the levels that are being stated or whether it isn't. The message that's being put out there, and that's what I'm talking about, just the message. We can deal with the legitimacy of these things as we go. I'm just looking at the message and patterns in when these things come out, okay? So Australia, are pushing the bird flu, H7 or whatever it's called, H7 whatever manifestation that's on now, okay? So they're saying that I think McDonald's had to postpone or delay or limit the breakfast time that they have by 90 minutes because there's a shortage of eggs, because they believe there's over 1 million chickens killed in Australia due to this bird flu, or the threat of the bird flu, or being tested for the bird flu, whatever the case is, okay? Now, that means a massive shortage of food for people. It also means, and this has been floated over the last few years in Ireland particularly, about the desire to limit cattle and the size of the herds, okay? So the government were often offering money to cull some of your cattle, okay? Now, is there any avenue for a forced culling? There is. So if you start bringing in remember the mad cow disease, the BSE sort of stuff, all them, there's a few kind of bovine illnesses or diseases that would lead to a strongly encouraged, if not enforced, culling of the cattle, okay, which would destroy the farming industry in Ireland. But it would free up tens of thousands of acres of land, lovely land, and it would incentivize the selling of this land, okay, because farmers might go bust if they have to cull their herds. So these avenues are nearly always open and they're always there to be played with, okay? So back to Ireland. COVID. They're now pushing again for masks to be worn, which means you might see an uptick in the promotion of COVID again. Interestingly enough, it's been totally out of the news for how long? We went from face masks to lock everyone down to, in the space of weeks, Ukraine's at war, we need to bring in tens of thousands of people. Doesn't matter if they've been jabbed, or it doesn't matter if they're wearing face masks. So the COVID story just fell off a cliff all of a sudden because the war story was being pushed to the front, okay? People didn't seem to bite on that too much. I'll go into that in a minute, but people don't seem to be biting on the Ukraine thing too much. They sort of went along with it, but the emotion for it isn't there. So then that got flipped into the Palestine story, okay? So that was heavily pushed. Still is. And now we're coming back to the COVID thing, which interests me because you look across at what's going on in America and what has gone on in America. In the 2020 presidential election between Trump and Joe Biden, you had the lockdowns roll out. And due to these lockdowns, you had the invitation to vote by a postal ballot, which means that you can vote by signing whatever and posting it in. Okay, you don't have to go to a polling station and present your ID, or you don't have to show that it's you on the postal ballot in any meaningful way, okay? Which opens up the door for vote manipulation. Again, I don't know the ins and outs of it. Did it happen? Probably. Is it likely that it couldn't have happened? Who knows? But it opens the door for it, okay? And that's what needs to be explored, because what happens is when you bring up these conversations, there's the default setting, the Agent Smith sort of matrix stuff to shut these conversations down or to ridicule them. Why would you do that? You would only do that if your mind has been made up for you and handed to you. Here are your buzzwords, here's your conversation boundaries and parameters, now go. Okay? But these things are worthy of conversation. Because in Ireland, 4 years ago in America, lockdowns, masks, postal ballots, and then that's led to 4 years of dispute over the legitimacy of the votes. Whatever the outcome is, it's led to 4 years of a disagreement on the votes and the legitimacy of them, and also the trust in the voting system itself, or in voting itself, okay? So now you come back over to Ireland, 4 years later, again, right before a presidential election, and now they're pushing the same sort of thing, okay? Now, Ireland has an election coming up March next year, if it's not called beforehand, okay? Since I have 2020 in my head, but it might have been 2022. It's either 2020 or 2022. But the Electoral Reform Act, that was brought in. What that allows for also is postal ballot voting. So you can now vote by posting it in. Again, could it work perfectly well? Yes. Is there an avenue for a wider avenue for cheating by doctoring ballots and stuff? Yes, of course there is. So it's worthy of keeping that in mind. Now, if we are to see a massive surge in either bird flu, COVID, disease X, as people were talking about before, if we are to see a surge in that and lockdowns come in, lockdowns would be more than likely still in place, especially coming off the back of the winter season where flu levels rise, okay? Coming off the back of that, lockdowns would be in place most likely when the next general election is coming up. So you're going to see a huge amount of these postal votes going in, and that's if everyone is not allowed go and post, okay? Allowed. Again, the nonsense language that we have to use in these things, okay? But that's where we are anyway. And it's worthy keeping in mind as well that the guy that created the PCR test, Carrie Mullins, he said that this is not for diagnosing any sort of disease, because what it does is it takes a tiny sample of DNA or of organic tissue, okay, and it amplifies this up. It keeps blowing it up to allow you to see in greater detail, or to take greater amount of samples from a smaller and smaller piece, okay, of tissue. And now what this done is this sped up the process massively of being able to take DNA samples from carcasses or bodies or old tissue that was found, okay? What it wasn't for was diagnosing diseases. So most likely, if you use a PCR test and you take a sample of DNA from someone who had TB when they were a baby, or had the flu when they were a baby, and you keep amplifying and amplifying and amplifying this sample of tissue, you're going to be able to detect that this person once had X, even though it might have been 25 years ago. So if you do this to everybody, you could essentially test everyone positive for some sort of flu, some sort of coronavirus, okay? Now, is that what's happening? I don't know, okay? But these are things worth thinking about, okay, as we move forward. So essentially, if this is rolled out again, lockdowns, vaccines, all that stuff, will you be taking them? Once bitten, twice shy and all that, okay? The second thing, I have it written down there because otherwise tangents emerge, right? The second thing is the Dáil has now approved for the Irish military, or for Ireland, to engage in defensive military exercises with the EU, okay? It's something to do with being underwater sabotage and stuff like that. Remember the stories of the Russian submarines that were floating around the Irish coast and that? Remember Micheál Martin pushing to destroy neutrality, and the idea that he wants nothing to do with a backward-looking view of sovereignty, whatever that means. Words don't change. You have to change the meaning of them and explain that you're using this word in a different context if that's what you're going to be doing. Because sovereignty means sovereignty, and there's no sell-by date on that, okay? But for him there is. He don't like it. He likes his own sovereignty, no doubt, not yours, right? So you had the stories of the Russian submarines. You had the stories of Micheál Martin wanting to dissolve or get rid of neutrality or loosen up on it in some way, okay? And then you have the Ukraine stuff in the background of us needing to constantly support them, give them money. Now it's been moved to, well, let's give them soldiers maybe, because you see in the UK, Sunak was talking about a conscription, okay, essentially a draft. America floating the same thing, okay? You see the EU are pushing towards a never-ending conflict with Russia, which will mean pulling all of the Irish, pulling all of the European peoples into a war, alright? So, what does that mean? You can see the same thing in America as well. So Trump is talking about the idea of making peace. Putin has said that Trump will probably be able to do that. Viktor Orban is now talking about that as well, of needing to negotiate and needing to speak to these people and try and get peace. But it looks like we're going to head straight, we are heading towards war, okay? And I suppose the interesting thing about this is, would that be enough for people to go, I'm done with this crowd in power, okay? If your children were being pulled in to serve in some sort of military exercise, alright? I don't know how far they'll float that idea in Ireland or if it'll ever get off the ground. But the potential for it's there, and you can read between the lines of these people. They either want you locked up in your home over the last few years, or they want you sent out of the country to war, right? While they constantly bring in people into this country, okay? So they're just a few little things, and you could jump on this thing all day long and go through all the news stories, and none of it's good, like, do you know? None of it's good. There's so many horrible things. Nearly the intersectionality of society, right, across nearly every level has been tainted, right, due to intersectionality, that kind of stuff. That if you're born of a certain race and a certain gender, your exploitation levels are so high, so you should be given X over a native population. All this kind of nonsense, right? So that's what we're dealing with. And I wonder if the calls to war become so loud and prevalent that it seems unavoidable. Would people be willing to put themselves forward? Or do they just want to put the flag up on their bio? Okay? Have a good day.